I never thought the loudest goodbye of my life would happen without a single hug. It was early morning at Nashville International Airport. The kind of morning where the air smells like coffee, perfume, and impatience. People rushed past me dragging suitcases that still had vacation tags tied to the handles. Children cried. Couples laughed. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere together. Everyone except me. My son, Daniel, stood a few feet ahead, scrolling through his phone. His wife, Laura, adjusted her oversized sunglasses and tapped her heel against the floor, already annoyed by something I couldn't see. They looked like travelers. Confident. Prepared. I look like a mistake. You've got everything, Mom? Daniel asked without turning around. Yes, I said softly, even though my hands were empty. No suitcase. No carry-on. No boarding pass in my purse. Just a folded itinerary and a trust I should have questioned sooner. Laura leaned closer to me, her voice low, almost kind. Just so we're clear, she said, your ticket is one way. I laughed. I actually laughed. That's funny, I said. Why would I only have a one-way ticket? She tilted her head, the way people do when they're explaining something obvious to a child. Well, she said, you're retired. You don't really have anywhere you have to be, right? Daniel finally looked up then. Our eyes met for a second. Just one. And then he looked away. We thought it'd be easier this way. Mom, he said. Yeah, I'll figure something out. That was it. No explanation. No apology. No pause. They turned towards security, their boarding passes already glowing on their phones. Laura didn't even say goodbye. I stood there for a long time after they disappeared. Long enough for the departure board to change twice. Long enough for my legs to start aching. Long enough for the truth to sink in. They hadn't forgotten me. They had planned this. 2 months earlier, I had buried my husband. 41 years of marriage doesn't end quietly. It ends loudly. Even when the house is silent. His shoes were still by the door. His coffee mug still had a crack along the handle. I hadn't moved it. Daniel had come by a week after the funeral. Mom, you shouldn't be alone so much, he said, standing in the doorway like a visitor instead of a son. Laura nodded beside him. A change of scenery would do you good. That's when they mentioned the trip. Florida. Son. Family time. They called it a healing vacation. I believed them because I wanted to believe someone still needed me. I sold my jewelry to help pay for it. Not because they asked, because I wanted to feel useful again. When you lose your husband, people stop asking what you need. They start deciding for you. At the airport bench, I finally sat down. My hands were shaking, but my eyes were dry. I reached into my purse and felt the small envelope hidden beneath my wallet. My husband had insisted I keep it. Just in case. Head said, if anything ever goes wrong. Inside was cash. And a business card. A lawyer. An old friend. For the first time that day, I felt something solid under my fear. I wasn't stranded. I was redirected. Across the terminal, a little girl waved at me. Her mother pulled her gently away. I smiled anyway. Not because I felt okay, but because I knew something was about to change. They thought leaving me at the airport would break me. They had no idea it would wake me up. I sat on that cold metal bench longer than I should have. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I was letting something old finally die. For most of my life, I had been the woman who smoothed things over. The one who waited. The one who forgave first. The one who believed love meant endurance. But sitting there in the middle of that airport, abandoned with intention, something shifted. I wasn't confused anymore. I was clear. The loudspeaker announced boarding for a flight to Orlando. That was their flight. I imagined Daniel and Laura settling into their seats, laughing, complaining about legroom, already rewriting the story in their heads. Mom decided to stay longer. Mom was emotional. Mom said it was fine. That's how people like them survive their own cruelty, editing the truth until it sounds reasonable. I watched their flight number blink once, twice, then disappear from the board. Gone. I didn't follow them. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the business card I hadn't touched in years. Robert Hale. Attorney at law, my husband's handwriting was still faintly visible on the back. Good man. Trust him. I trusted my husband. So I trusted the card. The cab ride downtown felt unreal. Nashville passed by in slow motion, brick buildings, neon signs, coffee shops opening for the morning rush. The city was alive, indifferent, steady. I was unraveling quietly in the back seat. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. You all right? Mom? Yes, I said. And for the first time that day, it wasn't a lie. Robert Hale looked older than I remembered. His hair was fully gray now. His office smelled faintly of paper and lemon cleaner. He stood when he saw me. Mrs. Carter, he said softly. I'm so sorry about John. That was it. That was the crack. I sat down and pressed my lips together as the tears finally came, not loud, not dramatic, just steady and exhausted. I need to change my will, I said once I could speak. He didn't ask why. Good lawyers don't. We went through everything slowly. The house, the savings, the small investments my husband had built piece by piece. The emergency fund he insisted I keep separate. Your son is currently listed as sole beneficiary, Robert said carefully. I want that changed. I replied. To whom? I took a breath. To people who won't leave me at an airport. He looked up then. Not surprised. Not judgmental. Just attentive. That can be arranged. While he prepared the documents, he asked a single question. Did they pressure you financially? I thought about the jewelry, the group effort, the missing receipts, the one-way ticket. Yes, I said. But they called it family. Robert nodded slowly. That still counts. That night, I stayed at a small motel near the courthouse. Nothing fancy. Clean sheets. Quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed and removed my wedding ring. I hadn't taken it off since the funeral. I placed it on the nightstand beside my purse. I'm still married. I whispered to the empty room. Just not to the life I thought I had. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams of airports. Of missed trains. Of standing still while everyone else moved forward. When morning came, I felt different. Not healed, but decided. Back at the law office, I signed my name. Once. Twice. Again. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I want everything locked, I said. No access. No exceptions. Robert nodded. Well, make sure of it. And I want documentation sent to a third party. I added. Someone neutral. He smiled faintly. You've thought this through. I was underestimated. I said. That won't happen again. After I left his office, I didn't go back to the airport. I walked instead. Past a park. Past a bookstore. Past a bench where an older woman fed birds from a paper bag. She looked peaceful. I wondered how long it took to get there. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Everything okay? We landed. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed 3 words. I'm fine. And I meant it, but not in the way he expected. By evening, the motel room felt temporary in the best way. I made a list. Not of regrets. Of boundaries. No more financial help, no unsupervised access to my accounts, no explanations owed, no apologies begged, for I folded the paper and placed it in my purse. A promise to myself. The next morning, I toured a place ID once dismissed. Independent living. Bright windows. Warm staff. People who said your name when you walked in. I sat with a woman named Ruth who told me, no one here is waiting to be chosen. We already chose ourselves. I smiled. 3 days later, the letters went out. Certified. Official. Final. Daniel would receive his. Laura too. I imagined their faces when they opened it. Shock first. Then anger. Then bargaining. I wouldn't be there for any of it. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and said my name out loud. Not mom. Not grandma. Not widow. Just my name. It sounded stronger than I remembered. They thought leaving me behind would erase me. Instead, it introduced me to myself. And this time, I wasn't asking for permission to exist. The first call came at 6:42 a.m. I know because I was already awake sitting by the window of my small rented room. watching sunlight crawl across the carpet like it was afraid to wake me too loudly. The phone vibrated. I didn't pick it up. I knew whose voice lived on the other side. The second call came 3 minutes later. Then a text. Daniel, what is this letter? Call me now. I sipped my tea slowly. The kind of calm that settles in only after you stop hoping people will be kind. By 7:15, my phone looked like a panic attack in digital form. Missed calls, voicemails, messages stacking on top of one another like lies that needed backup. Finally, I listened. Daniel's voice was tight, controlled, pretending concern. Mom, I don't understand this. It says I'm no longer the primary beneficiary. There must be some mistake. A pause. Then the hook. We just want to make sure you're okay. I smiled. By 8:00, Laura had joined the performance. Her message was sweeter. Always was. Hi Mom, 2 hearts. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. You know Daniel gets stressed easily. We love you. Please call. Love. Such a flexible word. I waited until noon. Not out of fear. Out of intention. Then I returned one call. Daniel answered on the first ring. Mom. Thank God. Where are you? Safe. I said. With who? With myself. Silence. What is this nonsense about the will? He demanded. You can't just change things without talking to us. I leaned back in the chair. I can. I said. And I did. That money was Dad's. And now it's mine. You're being manipulated. He snapped. Who put this idea in your head? I thought of the airport bench. No one. I replied. You took yourselves out of it. Laura jumped on the line without asking. We were worried about you. Mom. You disappeared. I was left. I corrected gently. That's not fair. She said quickly. You chose to stay behind. I closed my eyes. You boarded a plane. I said. I sat on a bench. Daniel exhaled sharply. This is punishment. He said. You're doing this to hurt us. No. I answered. I'm doing this to protect myself. Then came the guilt. The heavy kind. You know we were counting on that money. Daniel said. We made plans. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked. Plans that included me. Another silence. Laura's voice softened. You don't have anyone else. Mom. That one landed. Not because it was true, but because they believed it. I have myself. I said. And that's more than I had before. By the afternoon, the extended family had mobilized. Sisters-in-law, cousins who hadn't called in years, an uncle who once forgot my birthday but remembered my bank balance. They all wanted to understand. Understanding. I learned. It's just curiosity dressed as concern. One voicemail stood out. From my niece. Emily. I heard what's going on. I just want you to know. I'm proud of you. I cried then. Not for loss. For recognition. 2 days later. I agreed to meet. Public place. Cafe. Glass walls. Boundaries visible. Daniel arrived first. Angry. Tired. Entitled. Lyra followed. Eyes already wet. They sat across from me like I was on trial. You embarrassed us. Daniel said immediately. I stirred my coffee. You abandoned me. That was different. How? We're your children. And I'm your mother. I replied. Not your resource. Laura reached for my hand. I pulled it back. Her eyes widened. We raised you better than this. Daniel said. No. I said quietly. I raised you better than this. The conversation went in circles. Blame. Excuses. Revisionist history. Finally, Daniel leaned forward. If you don't reverse this, don't expect us to come around anymore. There it was. The final card. I met his eyes. You already left. I said. This just makes it official. They stood up. Laura hesitated. Then followed him out. The bell above the door rang. And something inside me settled. That evening, I signed the last document. Irrevocable. Done. Robert shook my hand. You chose peace. He said. No. I corrected. I chose dignity. Weeks passed. The noise faded. Life grew quieter. Better. I moved into the independent living apartment, planted herbs on the balcony, learned names, laughed again. One afternoon, I received a letter, handwritten, from Daniel. Short, angry, then desperate. I didn't reply, because some people only hear silence. That night, I sat with Ruth on the porch. Does it hurt? She asked. Sometimes, I admitted, but it doesn't control me anymore. She nodded. That's freedom. They thought money was the lesson. It wasn't. The lesson was this. Access is a privilege, not a right. And I had finally changed the locks. They didn't come back with apologies. They came back with flowers. That should have told me everything. The receptionist knocked gently on my apartment door. Mrs. Carter, you have visitors. Visitors. Not family. Not children. Visitors. I felt the difference in the word immediately. Daniel stood in the hallway holding a bouquet that looked expensive enough to require planning. White lilies. Funeral flowers. Laura stood beside him. Her smile already rehearsed. Eyes shiny like shed practiced in the mirror. Surprise. Mom. She said softly. I didn't invite them in right away. I let silence answer first. We just wanted to talk. Daniel said. No fighting. I don't fight. I replied. I decide. That made him blink. Inside, they sat on the sofa like guests in a hotel suite they didn't pay for. Laura placed the flowers on the table. I remembered you like these. I used to. I said. Used to. Daniel cleared his throat. We've been thinking. He began. Of course you have. Life's short. Laura added. Family is everything. I folded my hands. Go on. We may have overreacted. Daniel admitted. The will. The shock. It caught us off guard. There it was. Not sorry. Just surprised. Laura leaned forward. You don't have to change everything back. She said quickly. We just want to be included. Included. Like a committee meeting. Do you remember the airport? I asked suddenly. They exchanged a look. That was blown out of proportion. Daniel said. You could have called. I did. I replied. From a bench. Silence settled like dust. Laura sighed. We didn't think Yao'd take it this far. That sentence. That was the truth hiding in plain sight. You didn't think I'd survive without you. I said. Daniel frowned. That's not fair. Neither was leaving me behind. He stood up then. Frustration cracking through the polish. Are you happy now? He snapped. Sitting here alone. Proving some point. I looked around my apartment. The plants. The photos. The quiet. Yes. I said. I am. That's when Laura changed tactics. Tears. Real this time. I miss you. Mom. I believed her. But missing someone and respecting them are not the same thing. I miss the version of me that trusted you. I said. She doesn't live here anymore. Daniel's jaw tightened. Fine. He said. Let's be practical. There it was again. Money language. You're not getting younger. You'll need help. Care. Support. I have that. I replied. With who? He asked sharply. I smiled. With people who don't count the cost. That's when the knock came. Unexpected. Firm. The receptionist again. There's a Mr. Thomas Green asking for you. My breath caught. A name I hadn't heard in decades. Thomas Green. My husband's old business partner. The man who walked away when John got sick not because he didn't care, but because John asked him to. If I don't make it, look after her. I hadn't known he remembered. Thomas stood tall despite his age. Kind eyes. Steady hands. He nodded to Daniel and Laura without recognition. I'm here to see Margaret. He said. My name. Daniel stiffened. We stepped into the hallway. Thomas smiled gently. I heard what happened. He said. John told me once you might need backup. I swallowed. He always did. I whispered. Inside the small meeting room. Thomas laid out documents. Trust. Protections. Independent oversight. Your husband anticipated pressure. He said. He prepared safeguards. Daniel's face drained of color. You knew. He demanded. Thomas looked at him calmly. Enough. Laura's voice shook. This feels like an attack. Thomas didn't flinch. No, he said. This is a boundary. Daniel laughed bitterly. So that's it. We're out. I answered before Thomas could. You walked out first. They left without the flowers. They looked smaller somehow. Not defeated. Just exposed. That night, I sat on my balcony. Thomas joined me with tea. You okay? He asked. Yes, I said. For the first time in a long while. He nodded. You honored John today. I honored myself. I replied. Later, as the sun dipped below the buildings, I thought about forgiveness. Not as reunion, but as release. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. They thought coming back would undo everything. But growth doesn't work that way. Once you outgrow a room, even standing in it feels wrong. The morning was colder than usual. The city's usual hum felt distant. Muffled. Like I was hearing it through water. I hadn't slept well. Not because of my own thoughts, but because of the anticipation. Today, Daniel and Laura would challenge the safeguards. Today, the real game would begin. I arrived at the office where Thomas had arranged the meeting. The boardroom was cold, sterile, as if emotion were unwelcome here. Daniel was already there. Zoot sharp, posture rigid. Laura's smile was tight, rehearsed, ready to crumble at any moment. Thomas stood beside me, calm, a shield against the storm about to hit. Let's start, Daniel said, voice steady but eyes flicking nervously between Thomas and me. He spread papers across the table. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't cut us out entirely. John wouldn't, he would. I interrupted. And he did. Daniel flinched. This is more than I thought. More than you thought. I echoed. You didn't think I had agency. You didn't think I could survive without you. Laura tried again. Softer this time. We just want a fair share. We're your children. I let the silence answer. You're not my children in this matter. I said. You're claimants. And your claims don't dictate my choices. Thomas slid a folder toward me. Margaret. Everything is ready. The trust. The legal boundaries. Independent oversight. They can try to challenge it. But every contingency your husband anticipated is covered. I nodded. Relief and power blended in a heady cocktail. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. You think you can just dictate everything? Mom, this is insane. You're isolating yourself. I smiled. I'm liberating myself. His face twisted. You'll regret this. I looked at Thomas. He gave me a quiet nod. I realized then that regret is only powerful if you let it live inside you. The legal confrontation began. Lawyers arrived. Evidence was presented. I watched Daniel and Laura's confidence crack under the weight of truth. Documents. And foresight. Every maneuver they made was countered. Every argument anticipated. It was not revenge, it was clarity. Then came the health scare. My chest tightened mid-meeting. Thomas noticed first. Margaret. It was sharp. Sudden. Like lightning in the chest. I didn't panic. Not outwardly. Inside. I acknowledged it. Life was fragile. But still. The fight mattered. Paramedics arrived. Daniel and Laura followed. Panic replacing arrogance. Their previous bravado dissolved into fear. Concern, real human emotion for the first time in years. At the hospital, hooked to monitors, I finally let the truth sink in. Even facing mortality, I was stronger than their schemes. Stronger than fear. Stronger than grief. Daniel whispered beside my bed. Mom, we didn't understand. I held up a hand. You understood the wrong things. Laura cried silently. I'm sorry. I let the apology exist in the air but didn't embrace it. Forgiveness was mine to give. But reconciliation, that was their choice. Not mine. Thomas stayed by my side. Quiet. Steady. He didn't speak much. But I didn't need words. His presence was assurance enough. The hospital window overlooked the city I had once fled from. The streets below bustling, unknowing of the private storm that had just passed. A week later, discharged and back in my apartment, I arranged the flowers Daniel and Laura had brought weeks before. They were slightly wilted, but still beautiful. I accept them, I whispered, as a memory. not as a token of submission. They stayed on the table like silent witnesses to my journey. Weeks turned into months. Daniel and Laura learned boundaries. They visited occasionally, learning slowly that the power of love is not ownership. I rebuilt my life. Stronger, freer, richer in spirit than I had been when my husband was alive. And then, finally, I wrote letters to myself, letters to John, letters to anyone who had doubted that women could rise after betrayal, after grief, after loss. The last letter read, "Life is not about inheritance or money or even forgiveness. Life is about surviving with grace, surviving with love for yourself, and standing tall when the world expects you to crumble." I survived, and that is enough. The city was quiet that morning, the calm before a storm I hadn't yet imagined. I had returned home, settled into a rhythm that felt safe. Yet the shadows of the past lingered. Thomas had left me with one final piece of advice. "Margaret, the past may knock, but the future is yours to write." I didn't fully understand what that meant. Not yet. The unexpected ally, a knock at the door, jolted me from my thoughts. Standing there was not a familiar face, but one I had long forgotten, Mrs. Elena Whitmore, John's trusted friend from decades ago. She looked at me, eyes soft but determined. "Margaret, there's something you need to know about John's will. Something no one else has seen." I invited her in. My heart beat faster than it had in months. Secrets. John had always left something hidden, something he trusted only a few with. Elena handed me a leather-bound envelope, heavy with age and authority. Inside were documents revealing a secret clause. John had left an undisclosed fund to a charitable foundation in Margaret's name. The clause stipulated that this fund would activate only if Margaret survived attempts to undermine her inheritance. Daniel and Laura's attempts to claim my fortune had, unbeknownst to them, triggered this clause. I sat down. The world shifted. The public exposure the next morning. Daniel and Laura came again, confident and arrogant. They didn't know I now had absolute proof of their schemes. Elena and I planned to reveal it, but not our malice, out of justice. At the family estate, in a tense meeting with lawyers, Thomas, and myself, the truth unfolded. Daniel had tried to forge documents. Laura had manipulated old family accounts to mislead trustees. Every act intended to weaken me had instead activated John's protective clause. I watched their faces as color drained from their arrogance, replaced by panic, disbelief, and finally resignation. Daniel stammered, We didn't know." I raised a hand. Ignorance does not erase intention. You had choices. You made them. The confrontation later that evening. In the quiet of my apartment, Daniel came alone. His eyes were differentless rage. More sorrow. "Mom, I get it now. I was selfish. We were wrong. I don't expect forgiveness." But I let him speak. Sometimes the weight of words is heavier than action. Laura joined later, tears in her eyes. "Was sorry. Truly. I never wanted to hurt you." I nodded slowly. "The past is gone. Learn from it. That is all I ask." Margaret's ultimate choice with the estate secured, the hidden fund revealed, and the family reconciled in small measure. I faced my final decision. Keep everything for myself, as John had partly intended. Use the hidden fund to establish a legacy beyond wealth, the foundation to empower women, survivors, and those betrayed by family. Just as I once was, I chose the latter. The foundation bore John's name, but carried my heart in its mission. I dedicated it to independence, resilience, and empowerment. Reflection standing at the balcony of my home, overlooking the city bathed in golden sunset. I realized the inheritance wasn't just money. It was strength, survival, and clarity. I had survived the greed of others. I had survived my own grief. And most importantly, I had survived as myself. Elena joined me silently. She didn't need words. I had found peace. And with it, a future that was truly mine. Epilogue months later. At the foundation's inauguration, Daniel and Laura volunteered not because they had to, but because they finally understood. Thomas, ever my silent support, gave me a proud nod. And I smiled, finally free from the chains of inheritance. betrayal, and fear. My husband's memory lived on not in money, but in the choices I made, the lives I touched, and the strength I had discovered in myself. I whispered to the wind, softly, I survived. I thrived. And now, the world will see it too. The first light of dawn spilled through the tall windows of my study. The city hummed softly outside, oblivious to the storms I had weathered, the betrayals I had endured, and the battles I had won. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, reflecting on the journey. The house was quiet, finally mine, not because of money, but because of peace. The letters, the documents, the confrontations were behind me now. What mattered was the life ahead, shaped by choice, courage, and clarity. The unexpected visit, a soft knock, pulled me from my thoughts. It was Daniel, hesitant but sincere. Mom, I know we can't erase the past, but can we start over? Not as heirs fighting for fortune, but as a family. I studied him. For the first time, I saw the young man beneath the arrogance, beneath the greed. I don't know if it will ever be perfect, I admitted, but we can try, if we're honest and willing to do better. Laura arrived shortly after, eyes glistening with tears. We're ready, she whispered. I nodded. The past couldn't be rewritten, but the future could be shaped. Together, legacy beyond wealth, the foundation had grown beyond my expectations. It wasn't just about money, it was about stories, survival, and empowerment. Women who had felt trapped, silenced, or betrayed found refuge and support. I watched them thrive, guided by mentors, education, and opportunity, and I realized something profound. John's fortune was never just an inheritance. It was a responsibility to carry forward values, courage, and resilience. Closure with Thomas appeared at my side one evening as we reviewed the Foundation's annual report. You've turned pain into power, he said softly. Not many could do what you did. I smiled, a quiet satisfaction filling me. It wasn't just me. It was every loss, every betrayal, every moment I refused to break. He nodded. And now, you're free. I leaned back, letting the weight of years lift from my shoulders. I was free from fear, from revenge, from regret. Farewell to the shadows. Months passed. The city changed. So did I. The letters stopped arriving. The whispers ceased, and the last shadows of the past faded. One evening, alone on the balcony, I held a single rose, its fragrance reminding me of John, of love, and of loss. I whispered, I forgive you. I forgive the world. And I forgive myself. The wind carried my words, scattering them across the skyline. A new beginning, the final scene unfolded at the Foundation's gala. Survivors, families, and friends celebrated not wealth, but courage and hope. Daniel and Laura had stepped into roles of support, genuinely committed to change. Thomas stood quietly in the corner, proud and protective. And I stood center stage, no longer a widow haunted by inheritance, but a woman who had conquered fear, injustice, and betrayal. I addressed the crowd. This is not just my story, it is ours. Let it remind us that even in loss, even in pain, we can find strength. We can choose hope. We can choose legacy. Applause echoed. I felt it in my bones. Not for the money, not for the recognition, but for life reclaimed, and for justice finally served. The final whisper later. In the quiet of my study, I wrote a final note to myself. You survived. You thrived. You loved. You lost. And you learned. This is your story, and now it is finished. I placed the note beside John's favorite book, closing it gently. The house, the city, the Foundation were alive with potential. And I finally slept, peacefully, knowing the storm had passed, and the dawn of my life had truly begun. End of story.